Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar called What Turns You On. This is based on my new workbook called What Turns You On, A Guide to Living Your Best Sex Life. I'm Dr. Alexandra Katehakis, and today is Monday, June 3rd. Our topic is sex for today. So a few things before we start. As always, I want to remind you to type your questions into the Q&A box, and I'll answer them as we go along. And to be sure to leave us your comments, your book reviews, anything you want to say about What Turns You On Amazon. Let us know what you love about the book, how you might be liking the book, what it may be bringing up for you. And if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel by clicking the subscribe button below so you never miss a post. You can also keep up with what we're doing here at Center for Healthy Sex by following me on Instagram at Alex Katehakis or at Center for Healthy Sex. Another thing, just to remind you that there are a lot of resources in the chat box, so you can read the chat as we go along. If I mention another resource, it will be put in the chat box for you, as well as information about how to reach us at Center for Healthy Sex. So this webinar series will explore aspects of my workbook, as I said, called What Turns You On, A Guide to Living Your Best Sex Life. And it's designed to help you get honest with yourself about how you define sex so you can enjoy the kind of touch and sexual activities you really enjoy. And so you can have explicit and meaningful exchanges with a sexual partner. So often people end up having sex in ways that they don't really enjoy or don't even like because they haven't had a compass for how to figure out for themselves what they do and don't like, what kind of a touch they like, what kind of sexual activities they like, what they would be willing to try or areas they'd be willing to venture into, let alone have conversations with a partner about sex and sexuality. They just don't talk about it very much, if at all. And so my hope with this workbook was to get people into having a dialogue, thinking about sex and sexuality, thinking about your bodies at this stage of your life and what is agreeable to you, what brings you pleasure, what brings you fun and enjoyment, and start to fill in the edges of your sexuality for yourself so that you feel more whole, more clear, more complete with who you are. So if you grew up in a digital world like many people today, you probably learned about sex from places like internet pornography, apps, wiki pages, and blogs, just to name a few places. And in fact, that's where a lot of people are getting their sex education today. Or when they were younger, they got it online from various different sources and then just had to piece it together themselves. And in fact, many young people report engaging in sexual behaviors and activities that they're not really sure they like. It's just what they've seen in porn, or girls do what they think boys like, and boys do what they think girls want. And other people are just confused completely by the messages that they're getting. And so nobody really knows where to turn for the right kind of sex education. You might also have had awkward sexual experiences where you didn't feel like it was very sexy, or it felt totally embarrassing or shaming, and you just wanted the sexual experience to be over with. So it can range the gamut from that or no sexual experiences at all, especially if you had no sexual experiences in high school, and then later got to college and ended up getting drunk in order to have sex because your anxiety was so high. And that can just leave people with all sorts of confusions and distortions. So these uncomfortable sexual experiences can have you feeling unsure about who you are sexually, what you do and don't like sexually, whether you even want to have sex again. And then dating apps can add insult to injury, so to speak. They can create more confusion since They act as a digital marketplace where you can shop for partners by scrolling through the merchandise and swiping right or left. And we judge the mark, or we judge and mark people as favorites. Um, like we're marking a pair of shoes if we're shopping online, or a tennis racket we might be lusting after, without really knowing who the person actually is. So much of the digital world is focused on that which is visual and not that which is relational or special or interesting. It's all about this excitation about being chosen and liked without really knowing who the person is and whether they fit your erotic template at all. And these experiences compound to hide our authentic erotic self, since we have often haven't even defined our sexual preferences or what sex means to us through thoughtful discourse and examination. And it's my hope that this webinar will create that kind of discourse where people can ask questions and we can, sort of struggle for answers together, since there are no perfect answers, no right or wrong about sexuality or sexual experiences. There's only what we learn and what we are hoping to figure out as we evolve through life. And keep in mind that who we are sexually at 14, 15, 16 years old is perfectly natural, because all of our hormones are coming online and we're becoming sexual beings. And so experimentation makes perfect sense at that time, having crushes, trying things out. And of course, at that point, if you grew up in a digital time, looking at pornography and discerning what is sort of out there and not right at all versus what's interesting and arousing, and sometimes being very confused about sorting that out. So figuring out preferences from decade to decade is essential. And the kind of stuff you might have done in your 20s sexually is likely not something that you would be enjoying perhaps in your 40s or 50s or even later. So it's important to keep updating our sexual templates and what we do and don't want. And sometimes we don't even know the answer to that until we start this kind of exploration. So when we have a bunch of experiences in our 20s, in our 30s, and we're trying everything out and trying everything on for size, we can get hurt on the way. Not terribly hurt sometimes, but certainly banged up or a little bit scarred as we figure out where our edges are. And that's part of growing and changing and learning. And I think there comes a point where we have to get very clear about who we are and what we want and what we're open to. Because these experiences from the past that can be damaging even, or downright painful or confusing, compound to hide our authentic erotic self. Since we often don't even have that defined, or our sexual preferences defined, or what sex even means to us, through this kind of examination, until we're much older. And then we have to go back and undo the pains and the perils from the past. So imagine the literal headaches that could be avoided if you were free enough to have conscious conversations about sex. So with this series and ultimately with the workbook, I'm hoping that you'll embark on a journey into the core of your very being. How you define healthy or erotic sex is up to you. But having a template, having a guide, having a structure for how to think about what those words even mean, I think is very, very useful. So I'm hoping that you will find this an interesting invitation to think about, hey, maybe this summer I will take a look at this webinar, I'll take a look at this workbook, and I'm going to start to examine who I am sexually, what turns me on. And even if at the beginning of this process, where you end up is right where you started, then at least you have confirmation about yourself. And even if you're pretty sure about your sexuality, and you learn one or two or three things along the way, that's worth having updated your script about yourself and your sexuality. So remember, in this process, as always, you get to decide what's true for you. It's your choice. If you feel sheepish, embarrassed, or ambivalent about a sex act, I want to encourage you to stay in the feeling that's coming up. And in the workbook, there are measures and guides and scales for asking you what's coming up, what are you noticing in your body, and having you track it to see whether it's truly excitation or shame that's coming up for you. But to really just stay with the feeling that's coming up and to trust that you're on the right track for meeting a new part of your sexual self. Oftentimes, if something makes us uncomfortable, that's a surefire sign that we want to lean into it and learn more about what the discomfort is and maybe why we don't want to look at that particular area of our lives. So this invitation is an invitation to use your sexuality as a portal to a deeper understanding of who you are and to a deeper integration ultimately of who you are, and to be true to yourself, not hurt yourself, not to use sex as a weapon against yourself, but to really engage it as a source of intellectual, psychological, and physical pleasure. Remember that self-reflection is rarely easy. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing it in therapy, in a 12-step meeting, on a webinar, with a group of friends at dinner, in a workshop, or with a workbook. And in fact, getting emotionally naked is often painful. It's not just a bliss trip. There are things that come up that evoke shame in us for feeling like we should have known something, or we should have paid closer attention into a relationship, or we shouldn't have been duped, or you name it. And any number of things can come up for us. But it's essential to go through that gauntlet of looking at what we didn't see, what we could not see, what we couldn't know in order to grow and change. So I would say that self-reflection almost always yields clarity. Getting emotionally naked always yields clarity and a sense of liberation from distorted messages, beliefs, and feelings that have often been tucked away. And that's how denial works. That's how self-deception works, which you've heard me talk about before. That it's very sort of scrupulously entwined in our psyches to deceive ourselves as a form of protection. And I think when those walls of deception come down, those defenses are coming down because we're really ready to take a look at whatever we haven't been able to look at. Maybe it's the relationship we're in. Maybe it's the kind of sex we've been having that we don't honestly really like. Maybe it's any number of things that we're working in a profession we don't like, but we just kind of landed in it and we made a living doing it, but we really want to look at something else now. And looking at something else can be scary because it means you're going to lose the thing you have now. So you have to be brave. It doesn't mean that your entire world's going to be rocked or changed, but it does mean you're going to have to look at parts of yourself that you hadn't seen before. And I believe this kind of self-examination is what makes us flexible and nimble as we age instead of getting crusty and hard and set in our ways. There's really nothing to lose by doing it. You can always go back to what you were if you don't like what you found out about yourself. So in this process and with this invitation to use sexuality as a portal to change, to look at yourself more deeply, I want to remind you to steer clear of what you think you want or what outside forces tell you you should want, and to stay open to the possibility that you might discover something new about yourself, something really surprising about yourself. So let yourself be surprised and then let it sit with you as you notice the discomfort of that surprise. Like, what does it mean about me that I like sex a certain way or don't like it in a certain way? Because I've said this before a million times that human beings create meaning around sexual acts and sexuality. And so if you really love something sexually, but you have shame about what that means about you, you're going to have to unpack and unwrap that shame before you can get to the promised land, before you can really enjoy that sexual act without shame. So think about this as a forum and a possibility to really start to unpack sexual shame um, in a deeper way than maybe you ever have before. And keep in mind that the landscape of the erotic really challenges us to grow and change. It allows us to develop as a person and to expand our definition of who we are. We don't think about sex so much as a developmental stage throughout the lifespan. We certainly think of it as a developmental stage in the teenage years. Again, when people are going through puberty and bodies are changing and hormones are coming online, but our hormones are shifting and changing throughout our lifetime. In fact, they're diminishing over time. And David Snarch talked about sex being the development of a self over time, that it is a developmental task to really take yourself on as you age into your 50s, 60s, and 70s. So think about your sex life as a creative endeavor, that this is a blank canvas that you can paint on, that you can rearrange, that you can color into. And that's a part of what the workbook, What Turns You On, invites you into. There are unbelievably fun illustrations in the book. There's plenty of space for doodling in the margins, for making notes about what comes up for you, so that you use it as a personal diary, a place where you can put all your deepest, darkest secrets and work them through in a way that I hope ends up being fun for you and enjoyable in the end. Consider that you're a blank canvas and that you get to design your sexuality and preferences in any way you like. And honestly, have you ever really taken the time to sit down and deconstruct your sexuality and your sex life and reconstruct it in a way where it's a better fit for you today? You know, so many people get together and they have sex, and it's sort of this groping experience where people sort of try to find their way towards one another because there's not an explicit conversation going into the sexual act about likes and dislikes and preferences and um, interests that two people may have to see if it's even going to be a good fit sexually. And those conversations can be very sexy and very erotic in and of themselves before you even take your clothes off. But what could be more sexy than you knowing who you are sexually and being able to communicate that to a partner? And if your partner is not self-assured enough, that if they're not secure enough to hear you and be able to share with you in a self-same way, then that person is going to be a problem, or that's probably not going to be a good sexual match for you. So what better way to discern a sexual match? It's not from looking at pictures on apps and swiping. It's not from somebody's little profile that they write, because everybody's going to write something to make themselves look good. It's going to be in this conversation about what turns you on. What do you like sexually? And being able to hold on to yourself in the face of that conversation with somebody on a first or second or third date. So take a moment right now to think about the various aspects of yourself and ask yourself, what's missing from my sexual self? If you just take a moment right now, maybe close your eyes and take a deep breath. And ask that question and just let that question settle. What is missing from my sexual self? What's the first word that pops into your mind? What is the first image that pops into your mind? What is the first sensation that you have in your body? And just let that settle with you and let yourself be with the answer to that question, because that is the beginning, that is the kernel, that is the seedling for this inquiry, this investigation into the invitation of what turns me on. Some examples might be the maiden, the lover, the mother, the wise woman, the warrior, the lover, the father, the philosopher. What aspect of yourself is missing from your sexuality today? What energy or energies would you like to embody? So I want you to think about this today and to review your thoughts on this and take some time to keep asking yourself this essential question of who am I sexually? What's missing from my sexuality? What aspect of myself do I hide? Do I not bring forward? What part of myself would I really like to unleash in the sexual realm, so that I'm fully seen and fully known and fully naked with my partner? And of course, you have to have a partner that you trust in order to unzip like that. Someone that you really feel like you can trust, that's a safe person that can hold that energy, that can hold those aspects of you without shaming you or judging you. So we have a question here. Someone writes, my arousal template has been terribly distorted, a repetition compulsion from pornography. I'm married, recovering porn addict, and trying to overcome extreme hypersexual hyposexual sex avoidant behavior. Can this workbook be useful in my growth and desire for healthy sexuality? Well, I would actually turn your attention to the precursor to this workbook called Sexual Reflections, which is specifically written for people in recovery from sexual addiction and pornography addiction, because that's going to help you deconstruct some of that first before you work with what turns you on, which is a much deeper dive into sex and sexuality. So thank you for that question. But take a look at Sexual Reflections and work with that workbook and work with it with your therapist in therapy so that you can start to unpack some of those arousal templates and start to tease out what's healthy, what's toxic, what isn't, what is a repetition compulsion from you, etc. So as I wrap things up here, then, if there are no further questions, I just want to remind you to consider what I'm talking about as an invitation. It's not a should. It's an invitation to explore an essential part of yourself deeply. And for most of us, we grew up not being embodied. Nobody talked about sexuality in a healthy way. We're not educated about it in school in any way or a healthy way. We're taught what not to do. Don't get an STI, don't get pregnant, wear a condom. There are all these fears about sex and sexuality. And then we're left to our own devices to figure sex out. And oftentimes it is through pornography. And we end up doing things that we don't even understand why we're doing them, or whether we like them or don't like them, or whether they're true to our own nature or not. And our true nature changes from decade to decade also. Hopefully, as we get older, we get more secure and more adventurous sexually. We're willing to try things that we weren't able to when we were, sometimes even in our 30s and 40s, because we were too self-conscious, and self-consciousness is tied directly to shame. So as we age and we become more secure, we become more grounded, we become more self-assured about our sexuality, care less what people think about us, because we're more interested in being true to ourselves. So ask yourself these questions again. Who am I? What am I hiding from myself? What are the various aspects of myself that are missing from my sexual life now? And what part of myself would I like to bring forward and investigate? We have a question here. I've always lived a heterosexual life, but I know since college that gay male erotica aroused me, even though I'm heteromatic. I also have a history of problematic porn viewing. So is porn an accurate gauge of sexual orientation? Boy, those are complex questions that I think require probably more therapeutic investigation. Because look, most people are um, multisexual. Some people are very strongly on one end of the scale of heterosexual, and other people are very strongly on the scale of being homosexual. So they fall pretty squarely on that continuum. But there are a whole bunch of people that are fluid in the middle of the bell curve. And so pleasure is pleasure. And if you like having sex with men because you're a male, but you don't see yourself having a romantic relationship with a male. You don't want to cuddle with a male. You don't want to walk down the beach holding hands with a male. You see yourself doing that with a female. That just means that you enjoy pleasure with men. It doesn't mean that you are necessarily gay or want to marry a man and have a life with a man. And so these things should not get confounded and they shouldn't get labeled because when they get labeled, they get pathologized. Now, if you are excessively looking at gay male erotica, then certainly that's going to be your primary arousal template. So you have to decide where you want to put your attention, what kind of person you want to have a relationship with. Is it someone who's male, female, trans, non-binary? You get to decide all of that. And I think the more we take ownership of who we are sexually, the less pathologizing it becomes, the less shameful it becomes, and the less likely it is to go underground and get acted out compulsively in ways that can ultimately be destructive. So please, Joe, I love this question because of the complexity to it. Get yourself into therapy or start talking to your therapist about these very complicated strands so you can start to pull them apart and investigate them for yourself. And someone says, can sexual security exist without some emotional self-security? Can it help build it? Well, I don't think it can. I think we have to be emotionally regulated, emotionally grounded. We have to be neurally integrated and feel like we know who we are, that we, in general, walk the world feeling happy, whole, complete. This is the work of long-term psychotherapy, is that we earn a secure attachment. And when we can securely attach to a therapist and start to work through our issues of love and hate and upset and projections and all of that that we do in relationship, then we can start to translate that into the world of love relationships. And it's then that we start to weave in the aspects of our sexuality as well, because we're not just sexual or emotional or psychological. We are should be neurally integrated human beings, where our sexuality is just another aspect of how we experience joy, play, laughter, intensity, fun, pleasure, all of it. And you could ascribe those same qualities to food. Food is fun and joyful and delicious and can be intense and can be really, exciting or gross, depending on what you're eating. So we don't deprive ourselves of the taste that we have in our mouths, but we do deprive ourselves of sexual pleasure because it's been named dirty and bad for so long. So I really want to make a space for us to keep having these conversations every month, to take a look deeply at what does sex really mean to me? And why have I lost myself in pornography or in, a sexual addiction or compulsion? Is it because of my trauma? Is it because I'm repeating that? Is it because I felt too ashamed to really be who I was sexually, so I went underground with it? Whatever the case is, once you go down that road, you have got to heal from it because Sexual addiction and sexual compulsivity can be traumatizing to the body and the psyche in and of themselves because of the shame. So first you have to dig out from underneath that before you can start to treat yourself with respect and dignity, and be emotionally solid so you can start to build the kind of sex life you want to have and that you deserve to have. All right, so thank you for kicking this off in a robust way today. I look forward to hearing from you next month as we continue with What Turns You On, a guide to living your best sex life. In the meantime, take good care, and I look forward to seeing you then.